Cop detains black woman at airport, but she's an undercover FBI agent on a mission. In the bustling heart of Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, a scene simmers with tension. A harried traveler, a black woman with a leather satchel and a steely determination in her eyes, hustles to catch her connecting flight. But in the next moment, an overzealous cop singles her out, fixated on the color of her skin rather than the purpose behind her haste. Eyes dart, accusations flare, whispers ripple through the crowd. Yet no one, not even the arrogant officer, suspects that this seemingly ordinary passenger is, in fact, an undercover FBI agent, carrying secrets that could topple a hidden enemy within American borders. The day had begun like any other at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, one of the busiest airports on Earth. Lines wound through terminals, families huddled near screens displaying departure times. Business travelers sipped coffee while typing furiously on laptops. Announcements of flight delays crackled overhead. Amid this organized chaos, Naomi Cross walked briskly toward a gate in Concourse F, her posture confident, gaze forward. She wore plain jeans, a fitted black blazer, and comfortable flats, an ensemble chosen specifically to blend into the masses. But Naomi had a singular focus. Her mind replayed the briefing from earlier that morning. She was scheduled to meet a contact who claimed to have critical information about a high-stakes federal investigation. Though officially she was on vacation, Naomi's real agenda was far from leisurely. Several months ago, the FBI had uncovered a dangerous cell operating out of multiple American cities, including Atlanta. Her team suspected that certain law enforcement officials were offering cover to illicit activities involving drugs, weapons, and potential terror financing. Naomi's mission: confirm the contact's information and find evidence linking these shady dealings to a powerful network. She was prepared, mentally and physically, for almost any contingency. Her brown eyes scanned the concourse as she placed her carry-on bag on the floor. She had been told to watch for a man in a navy blue windbreaker who would approach her by the bookstore near her gate. The entire handoff was meant to be brief and discreet, yet the tension of the airport environment made her uneasy. Boarding announcements blared, strangers jostled against her. The fluorescent lights overhead did nothing to calm her. She took a calming breath, attempting to appear as one of the many seasoned travelers passing through. After all, this was an everyday routine for tens of thousands of people. For her, it was a potential life-or-death exchange. Just as she mentally double-checked her approach, she sensed eyes on her, a presence behind her, unsettled and bristling with suspicion. Naomi felt the prickling tension that years of FBI training had honed into a fine art, the sense that someone was watching. She resisted the urge to turn her head too abruptly. Instead, she turned slightly to glance at a flight board and caught a glimpse of a uniformed police officer, a white man with a stern, hawkish expression and a heavy build. He wore the standard navy blue airport precinct uniform and had a name tag that read, Truman. She thought nothing of it at first. Airport police were everywhere, ensuring security. But the man's glare lingered a moment too long on her face. Naomi slowly wheeled her carry-on forward and pretended to read the overhead displays. She reasoned that the officer was doing a routine check or maybe scanning the crowd for typical suspicious activity. But there was something intense, too intense, about the way he was eyeing her, as if he'd already assigned a guilty verdict without any evidence. Looking around, she noticed that travelers of all races hurried about, but the officer's gaze locked on her. She felt a surge of annoyance and concern. Racial profiling in airports was a reality she was painfully aware of, even as an FBI agent. She had heard horror stories from friends and colleagues about humiliating detentions and abrupt searches. And though she had her bureau credentials stowed safely, she couldn't risk exposing her identity prematurely. She had a mission. Naomi tried to keep calm, but her pulse quickened as the officer began closing the distance. A ripple of dread coursed through her. Would he demand to see her ID? Would he disrupt her meeting with the contact? The last thing she needed was an altercation that blew her cover. She clutched her phone tightly, feeling the weight of not only the FBI's trust, but also the unspoken scrutiny of her community. One false move, one unwarranted confrontation, and her mission could dissolve. She needed to stay in control, but Officer Truman's fierce stare promised trouble. Her instincts told her this cop wasn't just suspicious of someone with a black blazer. He seemed to harbor something deeper, a specific distrust and hostility toward a black traveler, no matter her real status. And so, with nerves steeled, Naomi decided that if he approached, she'd remain polite, calm, and above all, inconspicuous. If this confrontation escalated, she'd do everything possible to keep it from turning into a disastrous scene that would sabotage her critical assignment. Naomi Cross was no stranger to adversity. She was born in a modest neighborhood in Charlotte, North Carolina. Her father was a postal worker. Her mother taught middle school math. From a young age, Naomi displayed an inherent toughness, the kind that came from witnessing injustice but never letting it beat her spirit down. She'd lost count of how many times she'd been followed around in a store by security or pulled over for routine checks. Yet despite these microaggressions, or perhaps because of them, her resolve only hardened. She aimed high and refused to let anyone or anything define her possibilities. In college, Naomi majored in criminal justice. She refused to let the system's flaws push her away from her dream of making a real difference. The more she studied, the more she recognized that an agent for change often had to come from within. When instructors taught about profiling, bias, and the letter of the law, she was the first to raise her hand with a pointed question. She graduated summa cum laude, with professors labeling her the unstoppable force of reason. Her acceptance into the FBI was hard-won. She spent countless hours prepping for the entrance exams, the physical tests, the interviews. She never let the environment intimidate her. At Quantico, she kept her head held high, outperformed many of her peers in marksmanship and analytical thinking, and quickly earned a reputation for tackling any challenge with unwavering grit. But even in that realm, she was tested more than others, singled out as if needing to prove she belonged. That only fueled her ambition. After her training, Naomi took assignments across the country: Boston, Detroit, Chicago, Los Angeles, each time infiltrating dangerous circles, from money laundering rings to tech-savvy cybercriminals. She had a natural affinity for undercover work, exuding a calm confidence that led people to underestimate her at their own peril. She could blend into a party of high rollers, pass as a friendly neighbor next door, or assume the role of a corporate whistleblower, whatever the mission demanded. Yet the discrimination she faced never fully disappeared. There were times when local law enforcement partners treated her suspiciously, or when a suspect would hurl racial slurs in a desperate attempt to throw her off. Naomi learned to maintain composure, letting their ignorance fuel her determination to achieve justice. She kept personal life to a minimum. Friendships, dating, everything took a backseat to her career. Not out of coldness, but because she had internalized that any slip in focus could cost her or someone else their life. In recent years, her work had become more specialized. She volunteered for a special task force focusing on corruption within law enforcement agencies, cartels, and extremist cells. She believed wholeheartedly in rooting out wrongdoing, especially when it crept into the ranks of those sworn to protect. It was a path that had brought her to many covert operations, some taking her into the heart of communities where trust in the police was already frayed. She knew what it meant to carry both an FBI badge and the burden of representing black women in a system that often dismissed them. This latest mission in Atlanta was another test, one that would require her to navigate a labyrinth of alliances and double crosses. Word had reached the FBI that a major gun smuggling pipeline operated from the southeastern U.S. to overseas destinations. The network exploited shipping routes and used corrupt law enforcement officers to safeguard its operations. Naomi's contact claimed to have tangible proof of these activities. If that proof could be tied directly to an influential network, the FBI could dismantle it from the top down, which was why Naomi found herself at Atlanta's sprawling airport, waiting for a man who supposedly had a flash drive loaded with incriminating data. She understood the risks. If she was unmasked, The powerful people behind this ring might come for her. If local authorities were compromised, they'd do everything to bury the truth. And here she was, about to face a potential threat from a racist cop before even making contact. She couldn't let a single moment of prejudice disrupt her mission. Her entire career of perseverance had led her here. She was determined to see it through, no matter how formidable the odds. Officer Hal Truman was a 20-year veteran of the Atlanta Airport Police. At first glance, he was the textbook example of a career law enforcer, a strong build, a stern presence, and a certain swagger that suggested confidence. But behind those blue eyes lay a dark tapestry of unresolved bitterness, prejudices, and skeletons that had grown heavier with each passing year. Born in a small Georgia town, Hal had grown up in an environment that never challenged the prejudiced beliefs he absorbed as a child. He'd heard racist jokes from uncles, seen his father and grandfather treat black neighbors with veiled contempt, and he rarely encountered anyone who told him it was wrong. He joined the police force in his early 20s, thinking that wearing the uniform would earn him the respect and authority he craved. But that craving spiraled into something ugly as he discovered that he could leverage his badge to intimidate people he considered outsiders. Over the years, complaints trickled into internal affairs. Several travelers and even fellow officers alleged that Hal was unusually aggressive in his questioning of minority passengers. Sometimes these accusations were overshadowed by the daily chaos of airport security. Other times, Hal would expertly manipulate the details, framing his conduct as part of standard procedure. He had allies in the department, like-minded individuals who turned a blind eye or actively covered for him. If someone pressed too hard, Hal's mentors in the force would argue that he was simply doing his job in a high-pressure environment. In truth, Hal had begun to see his uniform not as a shield for the public, but as a weapon for asserting his worldview. He thrived on control, especially over those he viewed as beneath him. Through the years, he'd let his prejudices morph into a quiet but seething hatred. Each time he observed a confident black traveler, well-dressed, speaking with intelligence, an ember of rage sparked in him. Why were they so sure of themselves? Why did they act as if they belonged in first class or fancy airport lounges? Despite his veneer of a seasoned professional, Hal was deeply insecure. His wife had left him 5 years ago, citing emotional abuse and hostility. His attempts at promotion within the airport police stagnated because of his belligerent conduct. Frustration simmered, and he vented it by doubling down on his worst impulses. A few colleagues had tried to intervene early in his career, hinting that maybe therapy or counseling would help. He dismissed them with an angry sneer. To him, therapy was for the weak. Over time, rumors swirled that Hal might be receiving side payments for looking the other way with certain cargo shipments. Nothing was ever proven, but the rumor mill rarely churns without cause. Some baggage handlers mentioned that Hal seemed to be friendly with certain shipments that never went through normal screening. He'd wave them through with minimal inspection, scribbling a few notes on his clipboard. When pressed, he'd claim everything was in order. But the more it happened, the more suspicious it seemed to those who were paying attention. Hal's personal life was on a downward spiral, and at the same time, certain unscrupulous airport staff found him a convenient tool. His hatred, they realized, made him easy to manipulate. If they needed a passenger of color harassed or a rival's shipment delayed, Hal was the perfect candidate. Just a small bribe or an off-the-books favor, and Hal would do the dirty work, confident he was serving some twisted notion of justice. He never expected to face serious consequences. In his mind, the power of his badge granted him immunity. He believed the airport environment, with its constant inflow of travelers, gave him endless opportunities to wield his authority without raising too many alarms. After all, in the public eye, airport security was strict for everyone. If some travelers felt singled out, Hal assumed they wouldn't stick around long enough to file a detailed complaint. And even if they did, who would believe them over a veteran officer? This was the mental space Hal Truman occupied when he spotted Naomi Cross, a poised black woman in the crowd. Something about her confidence and composure made him bristle. A flicker in his mind said, "I've seen her type before. arrogant, rebellious. He had no idea she was an FBI agent. He only saw what he wanted to see. A target. Someone he could confront, perhaps degrade, all while standing behind the authority of his uniform. Little did he know that uniform and his hidden alliances were on a collision course with a woman who would upend everything he took for granted. Naomi tried to maintain a relaxed posture while scanning the concourse. She glanced down at her watch. The contact was supposed to appear in 5 minutes, but he was nowhere in sight. The tension in her stomach only grew as Officer Hal Truman advanced, boots echoing on the polished floor. He stopped about a foot away, hands hovering near his belt. "Ma'am," he said, his voice carrying a forced politeness that only thinly masked his hostility. "Could I see some identification, please?" His jaw was set, and a thin vein pulsed at his temple. Naomi plastered on a courteous smile. "Certainly, officer," she replied. "Could I ask why you need to see my ID? I'm just waiting for my flight." Hal's lips curled into the beginnings of a sneer. "Security protocol. Standard checks, ma'am," he said. His tone dripped with condescension as if reciting a well-worn script. "We've had some reports of suspicious individuals in this area." Naomi retrieved her driver's license from her wallet. She had her FBI credentials tucked away, but revealing them at this moment would jeopardize her mission. She handed him the license calmly. "I hope you're not insinuating I look suspicious," she said, meeting his gaze. She willed herself to stay composed, knowing any trace of anger or frustration might escalate the encounter. Hal glanced at her license, his eyes flicking over the details. He didn't need to radio it in. This was more about intimidation than procedure. A few curious bystanders slowed, sensing the tension. Naomi felt heat creep into her cheeks, but she forced herself to remain still. "You're from Charlotte?" Hal asked. "What brings you to Atlanta, Miss Cross?" He sounded like an interrogator in a small-town station rather than an airport cop, with thousands of travelers to oversee. Naomi offered the half-truth she'd rehearsed. "Visiting some friends. I'm flying out to LA later today." Hal eyed her suspiciously. When's your flight?" Naomi nodded toward the overhead screen. "In about an hour." His gaze lingered on her face. She got the sense he was hunting for any sign of nerves or guilt. "You traveling alone?" "Yes," she said softly, resisting the urge to roll her eyes. "Is there something specific you're looking for, officer?" He handed her license back slowly, a condescending gesture, like he was doing her a favor by returning her property. "Stay where I can see you," he barked as if half joking. But Naomi could tell it wasn't a joke. He was giving her an order, unsubstantiated by any real authority to keep a law-abiding passenger pinned under his scrutiny. She slipped the license into her wallet, heart pounding. In her peripheral vision, she saw a man in a navy blue windbreaker step into the bookstore. Her contact. She had to move soon to make that rendezvous. If she lingered under Truman's watch, she might lose the narrow window to collect the flash drive. Naomi maintained a steady voice. "Thank you, officer. I'll just be heading to the newsstand over there for a magazine." She gestured casually. Hal pressed his lips together, suspicious. It was clear he was reluctant to let her out of his sight, but he couldn't contravene her right to walk freely in a public space. "I'll be around," he said in a low voice as though making a threat, and with that, he stepped aside. Naomi walked off, exhaling the breath she'd been holding. She realized that confrontation could have gone much worse. She was lucky he hadn't insisted on a bag search or forced her to accompany him to some private screening area. Racist cops like Truman often used security protocol as a smokescreen for harassment. She had to remain hypervigilant. If he persisted, everything was at risk. Making her way to the bookstore, she spotted the contact perusing a rack of bestsellers. He had short gray hair and looked to be in his late 50s. Approaching him, she pretended to browse a shelf. Without looking at her, he whispered, "Name's Bill. Let's make this quick." They stood side by side, flipping through random books. Naomi saw Hal out of the corner of her eye, still hovering nearby. She had to keep her back partially turned to avoid drawing his attention. Bill discreetly slipped a small USB drive into her palm. The weight of it felt heavy with possibility. This was the key to unveiling a criminal network that could stretch far beyond Atlanta. "Everything you need is on there," Bill murmured. "Names, payment trails, shipping manifests. It's big, bigger than you think." He cleared his throat, flipping another page. "But watch yourself. The local cops, some TSA personnel, maybe even folks higher up. There's corruption in more corners than you'd believe." Naomi nodded, sliding the drive into a hidden pocket in her blazer. She whispered back, "We'll handle it. You should get out of here. Don't contact me again." Bill nodded, eyes anxious. He replaced the book he'd been holding and strode out of the bookstore. Naomi feigned continued interest in her book, then paid for it at the counter. The exchange had lasted all of 90 seconds. Simple, quick, and highly dangerous if discovered. As she exited, she caught Hal's stare again. Their eyes met, and Naomi felt the tension coil anew. He knew something was off. His expression was a mixture of suspicion and hostility. She had to shake him, or she might never board her flight. She didn't want to risk being taken into custody. Now that she had the crucial evidence, she needed to secure it, because the next time Hal tried to detain her, a simple ID check might explode into a bigger confrontation, and this time, her cover might be blown in front of an entire airport. Naomi slipped the USB drive into the lining of her carry-on bag, where a small compartment provided a hidden stash point. She had specially modified the bag for undercover work, able to secure sensitive documents or devices away from casual inspection. The seconds felt weighted with adrenaline as she walked toward Gate 27, stealing glances behind her. Hal Truman was nowhere in sight, momentarily. She planned to duck into a restroom to send a coded text message to her FBI handler, letting them know she had the drive. But caution tugged at her mind. If the local cops had ears on everything, she might tip them off. Instead, she decided to wait until she could disappear into the anonymity of a crowded terminal. She'd text once she was sure Hal wasn't trailing her. A little voice in her head cautioned that Hal might do more than simply watch. He might attempt to sabotage her flight. An unexplained error in her boarding pass, a last-minute security breach, or any number of minor illusions could keep her locked in a labyrinth of airport bureaucracy until it was too late. She recalled Bill's warning. The corruption was widespread, possibly involving TSA or airline staff. If so, she would have to think several steps ahead. Sure enough, as she neared Gate 27, she spotted Hal to her left, partially obscured behind a large potted plant near a coffee stand. He was trying to appear casual, but the tension in his posture gave him away. Naomi kept walking, her shoulders rigid. She thought about how best to slip past him. If she simply vanished into the crowd, Hal might grow suspicious enough to trigger an airport-wide alert. She needed a subtle approach. The gate area bustled with travelers. A small child ran circles around his parents, while a group of young professionals in suits tapped away at their phones. Naomi scanned the seating area for any vantage point from which Hal might keep watch. She saw a lone seat next to an elderly woman by the window. She sat down there, placing her carry-on at her feet. At this angle, she could see Hal craning his neck, struggling to keep a direct line of sight on her. Briefly, Naomi engaged the elderly woman in friendly chit-chat about flight delays. If Hal approached, she wanted to appear as just another traveler passing time. The woman talked cheerily about her granddaughter's graduation, grateful for the chance to share her story. Naomi nodded politely, part of her mind constantly scanning the perimeter. After a few minutes, Naomi excused herself to the restroom. She moved through the crowd so Hal would have trouble following without drawing attention. Inside the restroom, she locked herself in a stall and pulled out her phone. She typed a quick coded message. "Package secured. Will board as scheduled." She sent it to a number known only to her immediate FBI contact. The reply came within seconds. "Understood. Stay safe." She emerged, quickly checking her reflection to ensure she appeared calm. Returning to the gate, she spotted Hal checking his phone, jaw tight. He was probably in communication with someone, maybe a partner or a superior. But what reason could he give for wanting Naomi detained further? He hadn't found any contraband. He had no probable cause beyond his own prejudice. Still, her instinct said he wasn't done. This was the kind of cop who wouldn't let go easily. She took a seat again, pulling out a magazine she'd bought at the bookstore. The seconds ticked by as she pretended to read, her eyes sometimes darting up to watch Hal. He glared at her over his phone, occasionally stepping away to speak into his radio. She suspected he might be rallying support or orchestrating some random screening just for her. The question was, how far would he go? Her flight was boarding in 15 minutes. She felt her phone vibrate, a text from her FBI handler. Agents in LA standing by. Secure the drive. Naomi discreetly typed back, "Will do," and slipped the phone into her blazer pocket. Moments before the boarding call, Hal approached. She heard his heavy footsteps on the carpet. He gestured for her to stand. "Miss Cross," he said, his voice projecting authority, "I need you to come with me for additional screening." A hush fell among the nearby passengers. Naomi could feel the weight of their stares, the unspoken question. What did she do? She also felt her blood pressure rise. Officer Truman offered no explanation beyond additional screening. Naomi knew that refusing might give him an excuse to escalate, but going along with him threatened her mission. Calmly, she asked, "Why am I being selected, officer? I'm about to board my flight." Hal's grin was razor thin. "Routine," he lied, scanning her face for any sign of defiance. "We're doing spot checks, especially for passengers traveling alone." Naomi's mind raced, searching for a strategy that wouldn't blow her cover, but also wouldn't let Hal derail her. She took a breath. "All right," she said, her voice measured. "But let me grab my bag." He seemed almost disappointed that she complied so easily. Yet Naomi knew that resisting too soon could give him justification to cause a scene. She stood and followed him toward a nearby security station. Part of her prayed that the search would be quick, that they'd find nothing suspicious and she'd still catch her flight. But she had a sinking feeling that Hal Truman wasn't interested in a routine check. He wanted something else, maybe an excuse to humiliate her, or even discover the drive she carried. Hal called over another officer, a younger man who looked uneasy. The second officer was likely roped in as a witness to give the appearance of legitimacy. Naomi braced herself. One wrong turn here and her entire operation could collapse, but her training had prepared her for these moments of intense pressure. She forced herself to remain calm, hoping that somewhere in the swirl of airport announcements and flickering screens, a path to complete her mission would emerge unscathed. Officer Truman led Naomi into a small security office off the main concourse. The walls were painted a sterile white, and a single fluorescent light buzzed overhead. The younger officer, his name tag read Anderson, stood by the door, arms folded, looking somewhat uncomfortable. Naomi placed her carry-on bag on a metal table as instructed. Truman nodded at Anderson, who was clearly following a script. Open the bag, check compartments, search for anything unusual. Naomi watched with a barely concealed sense of worry. She relied on the special lining in her bag to hide the USB drive. If they dug too deeply or used advanced scanners, they might find it. The tension in the room felt like a high-voltage wire. She kept her posture relaxed, hands at her sides, eyes tracking their every move. Training had taught her that showing fear only fed the aggression of someone like Truman. "All right, Miss Cross," Truman said, scribbling notes on a clipboard. "Empty your pockets, remove your blazer, shoes, the usual procedure." He met her eyes, a twisted satisfaction in his stare, like a predator anticipating the kill. Naomi complied, knowing that refusing would escalate this into a probable cause detention. She placed her blazer on the table, then stepped out of her flats. Officer Anderson ran a handheld metal detector around Naomi's waist, arms, and legs. The device beeped at her wristwatch and the small earring in her left ear, which he promptly inspected and waved aside. Meanwhile, Truman rummaged through Naomi's blazer pockets. He found nothing but a small wallet, her phone, and a pack of gum. He frowned, frustrated by the lack of anything incriminating. The younger officer started unzipping compartments in her carry-on. Naomi forced herself to breathe evenly. Anderson found her laptop, a small cosmetic case, and 2 paperback novels. He set them aside for scanning. Then he reached the hidden zippered pocket. Naomi felt her pulse spike. But as Anderson's hand brushed the lining, there was a knock on the door. A voice called, "Truman, you got a minute?" The door opened, revealing an African-American TSA supervisor named Rhonda Walker. She stepped inside with an air of authority. Her voice was firm yet calm. "What's going on here?" Truman stiffened. "Security screening, Miss Walker. We have reason to believe." "Reason to believe what?" she countered, her brows creasing. She glanced at Naomi, noticing the color of her skin, the humiliating position she was in, shoes off, arms outstretched. Rhonda locked eyes with the younger officer. "Anderson, is everything all right here?" Officer Anderson hesitated, caught between 2 superiors. Just following standard procedure, ma'am," he said quietly. Naomi sensed from his tone that he didn't want trouble, but felt cornered by Truman's orders. Rhonda turned her attention back to Truman. "I was flagged about a possible abuse of screening protocol. We've had complaints. We can't just randomly pull travelers from boarding without cause. May I see your documentation for this search?" Truman flushed, obviously not expecting to be challenged. "I'm in charge here, Miss Walker," he snapped. "We have every right to question suspicious passengers." Rhonda squared her shoulders. "According to TSA guidelines, you need an articulable reason for heightened screening. And from what I understand, Miss Cross cleared the initial security checkpoint. Did she set off any alarms? Did a K-9 alert on her bag? Do you have a specific intelligence memo that requires this?" Truman clamped his jaw shut, struggling to find a response. Naomi could see the tension in his eyes, the fury at being called out. Meanwhile, Officer Anderson discreetly stopped searching her bag. Naomi silently thanked Rhonda for stepping in at just the right moment. Rhonda addressed Naomi directly. "Ma'am, I apologize for any inconvenience. If there's no solid basis for this search, we will ensure you can proceed to your flight." Naomi let out a careful breath. "Thank you, Miss Walker," she said. Her voice was steady, hiding the storm inside her. She longed to produce her FBI badge and reveal the real reason she needed to be on that flight. But that would unravel all her covert operations. Instead, she remained the polite traveler who had just been singled out. Truman's anger rolled off him in waves. He was cornered. If he continued the search without justification, he risked an official complaint, maybe even disciplinary action. And there was Rhonda, a TSA supervisor with enough clout to override him in this instance. He slammed the clipboard onto the table and scowled. "I suppose Miss Cross is free to go," he said through gritted teeth, as if spitting nails. Anderson handed Naomi's carry-on back, embarrassment plain on his face. She slipped on her shoes and blazer, gathering her possessions. Rhonda gave her a reassuring nod. As Naomi stepped past Truman, he leaned in close. His voice was barely above a whisper, laced with menace. "I know you're up to something," he muttered. "I'll be watching." Naomi flashed him a cool look, unwilling to let him see any vulnerability. Then she turned away, heart pounding. Outside the security office, Rhonda accompanied her a few steps, whispering, "I'm sorry about that, ma'am. This isn't the first time we've had complaints about Truman. If you need any help or want to file a report, I can give you—" "Thank you," Naomi said softly, carefully choosing her words. "I might take you up on that, but for now I really need to catch my flight." Rhonda nodded and let her go. Naomi rushed toward gate 27, checking her watch. The final boarding announcement echoed through the corridor. She managed to board just in time, her carry-on in tow, her eyes still vigilant. Even as she found her seat, she couldn't relax. She half expected to see Truman appear in the doorway, brandishing a last-minute excuse to yank her off the plane. But the doors closed. The engines revved. Naomi sank into her seat, trembling with a mix of relief and residual anger. She owed a debt of gratitude to Rhonda Walker, a TSA supervisor who had intervened at a crucial moment. Allies could indeed appear in unexpected places, even in a landscape rife with corruption. Naomi grasped the hidden USB drive, silently vowing to see this mission through. For all the people who endured discrimination daily, for those who stood up against tyranny, and for the truth that lay encrypted in that small piece of plastic and metal. Officer Hal Truman seethed as he returned to his post. He'd been humiliated in front of a TSA supervisor and a rookie officer. That woman, Naomi Cross, had gotten away under his watch. The rational part of his mind recognized he had no real evidence against her, but a darker part, the one fueled by stubborn prejudice, told him to pursue her, to prove she was a threat. He wanted vindication. He stomped into a break room that doubled as a makeshift office. Shoving aside papers and coffee cups, he flopped into a swivel chair and pulled out his phone. With a scowl, he dialed a number and waited for the ring. Eventually, a gruff voice answered. "It's Truman," he growled. "Something's off about a traveler named Naomi Cross. Flight to LA. If you can, get your people to keep tabs on her. Maybe she's just a civilian, but I'm telling you, I've got a bad feeling." The voice on the other end was quiet for a moment. Then it replied, "Look, Hal, you know we only run these checks if there's a payoff. You got any reason beyond your usual suspicion?" Truman hesitated. He recalled rumors of his associate's involvement in smuggling. If Naomi was somehow connected, maybe that would justify a deeper look. I think she's carrying something. Could be contraband." Even as he spoke, he realized he was speculating, but his ego demanded he double down. The voice grunted. "We'll see what we can do. No guarantees. And you better not stir up any internal affairs drama. The last thing we need is them sniffing around." After he hung up, Hal glowered at the wall. The humiliating memory of Rhonda Walker dressing him down replayed in his mind. "We've had complaints. You can't randomly pull travelers from boarding." The word stabbed at his pride. He clenched his fists. He was done playing by polite rules. If no one else would see things his way, he'd handle it on his own. An hour later, he scrolled through his phone, looking for any sign that Naomi Cross was indeed dirty. He rummaged through the airport's internal incident logs, searching for a name match. Nothing relevant turned up. If she had a criminal record, it was well hidden. She seemed squeaky clean. That only fueled his paranoia. She's too clean. No one travels solo without reason. She was up to something, I'm sure of it. His scowl deepened when he saw an email from Internal Affairs in his inbox. He opened it. The subject line read, "Requested statement, allegation of profiling." Truman's nostrils flared. Another complaint had been filed, presumably regarding the incident with Naomi. But it could also be from the many times he'd singled out travelers of color. He jabbed the delete key. He'd deal with it later. Stepping out of the break room, he strode down the corridors of the airport police station. The neon glow of overhead lights flickered across the white-tiled floors, making the place feel even more sterile. He passed by the offices of a few higher-ranking officers who gave him polite nods, but he could sense their reservations. They'd grown tired of hearing about his questionable stops and detentions. Truman knew his career was on precarious ground. He'd been passed over for promotions, and the complaints piling up were no longer easy to brush away. But rather than reflect on his actions, he let anger and resentment fester. "I've given 20 years to this job, and they treat me like the villain." The irony eluded him. As the day wore on, he made calls to some of his contacts in the cargo and shipping wings of the airport. Small-time criminals who occasionally fed him tips in exchange for certain privileges. He wanted to see if they could dig up anything on Naomi Cross, any sign of suspicious baggage or a paper trail. Most of them shrugged off his request. They'd never heard of her. One was more forthcoming, saying, "No hits, man. Sorry. We'd remember a looker like that if she was messing with our operation." Frustrated, Truman ended the call. If official channels wouldn't budge, maybe he could do his own investigating. He found himself fantasizing about traveling to LA, tracking Naomi down, catching her red-handed. He imagined the praise he'd receive for exposing a threat that everyone else had overlooked. Then they'll know I was right all along. A sudden knock on the break room door jolted him out of his reverie. Standing there was Rhonda Walker, the TSA supervisor who'd embarrassed him in front of that traveler. She wore a serious expression. "Officer Truman, can we talk?" she said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. He glared at her. "About what?" "About your conduct," she said firmly. "We've got to come to an understanding or this will escalate." She closed the door gently behind her. Truman slammed his hand on the desk, causing a stack of papers to topple. "I don't need a lecture from you," he growled. Rhonda's eyes flashed. "Actually, you do, if you want to salvage what's left of your reputation here." She crossed her arms, unwavering. "You're on thin ice, Hal. People are watching. If you keep harassing travelers without probable cause, it's not just your job on the line. It's the airport's liability." He stood leaning forward, letting his height advantage loom. "I know what I'm doing. If you and the others weren't so busy being politically correct, maybe you'd see the threat that's right under your nose." Rhonda didn't flinch. "We deal in facts, not prejudices. If you have facts, bring them. Otherwise, I suggest you cool off." Her unwavering stance seemed to make Truman's blood boil, but he was cornered, with no actual evidence to present. After a tense standoff, Rhonda left. Truman stared at the empty doorway, chest heaving. His rage simmered. If the system wouldn't help him, he'd handle it his way. Little did he realize that each step he took down this path was leading him toward a greater unraveling, because the more he sought extra-legal methods to prove his prejudiced hunches, the closer he came to exposing his own shady alliances, and ultimately to crossing paths with an FBI agent who was no stranger to dealing with crooked cops. Miles away in the sky, Naomi Cross sat aboard the plane, the hum of the engines a steady backdrop to her racing thoughts. She pretended to be engrossed in a novel, but her mind churned over the next steps. As soon as she landed in Los Angeles, she'd rendezvous with her FBI handler and a special forensics tech. They'd examine the USB drive, verifying its data trail, bank transfers, shipping logs, possibly even a list of bribed officials. It was too big a case to crack alone. Naomi's role was to get the physical evidence out of Atlanta. From there, a specialized FBI team could pursue leads, infiltrate the smuggling network, and gather the final puzzle pieces. She wondered if Hal Truman might show up again, or if others like him lurked in the wings. The notion both angered and saddened her, that men like him tarnished the badge she believed in. Upon landing, Naomi felt a buzz on her phone, a secure message indicating her handler was waiting just past the gate. She disembarked, scanning the sea of faces. Sure enough, she spotted Agent Veronica Dunn, a statuesque woman with curly black hair, leaning casually against a pillar. Their eyes met, and Naomi gave a subtle nod. They walked through LAX's crowded terminal, making small talk about the flight until they reached a more secluded alcove near baggage claim. There, Naomi pulled the USB drive from her bag. Veronica's eyes flickered with excitement. "We've waited months for this kind of evidence," she said, tucking the drive into a secure pouch. "Let's not celebrate just yet," Naomi cautioned. "The man who gave me this says the corruption runs deep. Some local cops, maybe some feds. We need to be careful who we trust." Veronica nodded. "Agreed. We'll head to the field office, run a deep scan. If everything checks out, we'll escalate to the Organized Crime Task Force." Naomi let out a breath. Finally, let's do it. They navigated to a waiting SUV, tinted windows providing privacy. Veronica drove them to the Los Angeles field office, housed in an imposing concrete building that loomed against the setting sun. Once inside, they descended into a secured lab. A specialized technician greeted them with a quiet nod. He took the USB drive with gloved hands and plugged it into a dedicated laptop system that was isolated from the main network. Naomi and Veronica hovered behind him as lines of code and folder trees appeared on the screen. The tech typed rapidly, bypassing encryption and searching for hidden data pockets. Naomi noticed folder names like contracts, payments, and transit schedules. Her pulse quickened. If even half of this data was valid, it would be enough to trigger a nationwide sting operation. An hour later, the tech turned to them, wiping a bead of sweat from his brow. "It's real," he said. "Dozens of government officials. Some are small fish, airport security, local police. Others are more high-ranking. Shipping routes, bribes, the works. We've stumbled onto a massive ring here." Naomi exchanged a glance with Veronica. She thought of Hal Truman back in Atlanta, suspecting him to be part of the lower rung, or at least a pawn in someone else's game. But the question remained, who was coordinating it from the top? That would be the next big reveal. However, they had enough to start building a case. The scale of it was staggering. Millions of dollars in illicit transactions, arms crossing international borders, possible terror funding. Veronica nodded decisively. "We need to coordinate with the task force immediately. This is bigger than we anticipated." Naomi allowed herself a small smile of triumph. "We got it," she whispered. Months of undercover toil, near catastrophic close calls, and endless caution had led to this moment. She felt a profound sense of relief, but also an unspoken weight. There would be repercussions for those involved. Some might become desperate, violent. She recalled Bill, the informant who risked his life to hand over the drive. Would he be safe? They soon briefed a senior agent who sat stone-faced as he skimmed the summary. "Impressive work, Cross," he said at last. "We'll coordinate with law enforcement agencies across multiple states. For now, keep everything on a need-to-know basis. We can't tip off the suspects." Naomi nodded, her mind already whirling with the next steps. Officially, she was off the clock, free to rest. Unofficially, she'd remain vigilant. She stepped out of the office, a crisp Los Angeles breeze hitting her face. The city lights glistened, but her thoughts lingered on a different place. Atlanta, where a certain cop might be digging his own grave by trying to dig into hers. Across the country in Georgia, Hal Truman paced in his living room. He'd compiled every flimsy detail he could about Naomi, her name, her flight route, her home address in Charlotte. Yet something wasn't adding up. His phone vibrated. An informant texted, "No trace in LA. She's clean. Let it go." Truman's fists balled. He wouldn't let it go. Over the following days, he combed through social media, searching for any digital footprint. Naomi's accounts were tight, revealing nothing more than standard posts about family or innocuous references to her job. She'd listed a generic corporation as her employer. His frustration boiled over. A voice in his mind taunted, "You're chasing a ghost." But part of him still believed she was hiding something. Each time he recalled her calm demeanor, it gnawed at his pride. Eventually, he decided to turn his attention to the usual tasks at work, but an uneasy feeling lingered in his gut. What Hal Truman didn't realize was that the clock was ticking. The FBI was about to sweep in, armed with evidence that would tie numerous crooked cops, and possibly him, directly to a sprawling network of crime. Naomi Cross had been the catalyst, and soon the entire conspiracy would come crashing down. The truth was out, and those complicit in it would have nowhere to hide. 2 weeks later, back in Atlanta, the airport bustled with holiday travelers. Among the crowds were multiple undercover FBI agents. They discreetly surveilled employees, cargo areas, and even local police, waiting for the signal that would launch a sweeping operation. Naomi Cross stood among them, having flown in under a different alias this time, her presence unseen by most. The intelligence gleaned from the USB drive had exposed an intricate network, spanning from crooked baggage handlers to officials in shipping companies. Some of them worked directly with a ring that smuggled weapons to conflict zones overseas. And Hal Truman, though hardly the mastermind, showed up in multiple conversation logs as a friendly checkpoint for certain suspicious cargo. It seemed he'd taken bribes to look the other way, likely rationalizing his illegal behavior under some twisted self-justification. Naomi's role tonight was simple but pivotal: to observe, confirm the presence of key suspects, and signal the strike team when the main players gathered for a covert handoff. She'd spent the day blending in with travelers, always keeping an eye out for Officer Truman's face among the security staff. Part of her hoped he wouldn't show. She wanted him apprehended without the risk of another personal confrontation. But fate wasn't so kind. At around 8 p.m., Naomi noticed Truman patrolling near a service corridor leading to the cargo area. He appeared fidgety, glancing at his phone repeatedly. She recognized the signs. A deal was about to go down. Another uniformed officer joined him, and they exchanged hurried words, then moved toward a restricted area. Naomi discreetly radioed the FBI strike team. "Target in motion," she murmured into a small lapel mic. "He's heading to Cargo Bay E." Within minutes, black-clad agents positioned themselves at strategic points. Naomi slipped into an employee-only hallway, silently following Truman at a distance. When he turned a corner, she hid behind a stack of supply crates. Through a gap, she witnessed a scene that solidified everything they'd suspected. A group of men in plain clothes, quietly offloading crates from a nondescript truck. The boxes bore no official shipping labels. Truman oversaw the operation, nodding as the men hauled the crates onto a conveyor belt that bypassed standard inspection. Naomi's heart pounded. Even after all her training, it was unsettling to see law enforcement so brazenly abetting criminal activity. She whispered into her mic, "Visual confirmation of illegal cargo, Hal Truman present. Proceed." The earpiece crackled. "Confirmed. Green light. Move in." At that moment, the men readied to move the crates further into the airport storage area. Truman checked his watch. The plan was probably to have the crates loaded onto a plane departing for an international destination. Naomi stepped out, her posture tense. Just as one of the henchmen spotted her, she flashed her FBI badge. "Federal agent, step away from the crates." Chaos erupted. Truman's eyes went wide with shock as a dozen federal agents poured in from multiple directions. Guns drawn, badges flashing, they shouted orders. "Hands up, don't move." Several criminals tried to bolt. Agents tackled them to the ground, confiscating weapons and phones. One man lunged at Naomi, but she swiftly sidestepped and pinned him against a crate, twisting his arm behind his back. She turned her gaze toward Truman, who stood rooted in place, breathing heavily, his face ashen. In that moment, Naomi removed any doubt about who she was. "Officer Truman," she said, locking eyes with him. "Naomi Cross, FBI. You're under arrest for conspiracy, accepting bribes, and facilitating the smuggling of illegal arms." His expression morphed from stunned to furious. He opened his mouth, but no words came. Finally, he managed a strangled denial. You set me up." Naomi advanced, her voice cool. "You set yourself up the moment you started taking dirty money. You only put a target on me because of your own prejudice, and that led us straight to you." Two agents stepped forward to cuff him. Truman jerked away, trying to resist, but found himself quickly overpowered. "Wait!" he yelled, panic seeping into his voice. "You don't understand. I was just—" His excuses died in his throat. There was no talking his way out of this. The evidence was damning, and the FBI had it all. Naomi stood tall, watching as they read Truman his rights. She felt no joy in seeing a fellow law enforcement officer brought down, but she knew justice had to be served. The other men, pinned and cuffed, exchanged accusing glares, as if they'd been deceived by the same illusions of easy money and dirty power. Agents moved in to secure the cargo crates, each box now an undeniable piece of evidence in a federal criminal case. Truman's eyes blazed with a hateful mixture of fear and rage as they led him away. Perhaps he finally realized how deeply he'd underestimated the suspicious traveler in the concourse, or how thoroughly he'd become entangled in the web of corruption. Either way, the consequences were now inescapable. Naomi watched in silence as the scene played out, a moment that underscored how prejudice, greed, and abuse of power ultimately destroy the very people who cling to them. In the days after the airport sting, media outlets blared stories about the corruption scandal at Hartsfield-Jackson. Mugshots of crooked cops and smugglers flashed across screens, with Officer Hal Truman among them. His once proud reputation lay in tatters, undone by greed and prejudice. In the Atlanta FBI field office, Naomi Cross quietly compiled her final report. Despite the vindication, she felt no triumph. Seeing a fellow law enforcer betray the badge was always bitter. Yet the takedown had uncovered a colossal arms smuggling conspiracy and saved countless lives from potential violence. As Naomi reviewed documents, TSA Supervisor Rhonda Walker dropped by to say a heartfelt thank you. Truman's exposure meant real change for airport security procedures. Rhonda's relief was palpable. Honest officers could now do their jobs without fear of being overshadowed by corruption. That evening, Naomi made a last sweep through the airport before returning home. Standing by a window overlooking the busy runway, she reflected on the cost of Truman's racism and illicit deals. She took small comfort in knowing that justice, at least for now, had won out. Far from relishing his downfall, she saw it as a necessary reckoning. Her phone buzzed, a message from Bill, the brave informant. "I'm safe. Thank you." Naomi smiled, tucking the device away. Outside, the roar of departing planes reminded her that the world kept moving forward, even after moments of crisis. Boarding a flight with her mission complete, Naomi gazed at her FBI credentials. This victory was only one step in a larger fight against corruption. Racism and wrongdoing within law enforcement wouldn't disappear overnight, but each exposed scheme brought them closer to accountability. Steeling herself for the next battle, she settled into her seat. For now, justice had prevailed, and tomorrow she would be ready for whatever came next. Thank you for joining me on this intense journey, where we witnessed a corrupt officer's downfall and a fearless undercover FBI agent's triumph. This story reminds us of an undeniable truth. Racism and corruption undermine the very fabric of law enforcement, and it takes courage, both from individuals within the system and from ordinary citizens, to expose wrongdoers. Agent Naomi Cross stood up against discrimination and danger, and her steadfast commitment to justice ultimately brought the guilty to their knees. If this tale gripped your heart and got you rooting for the truth, I invite you to show your support. Please like this video, share it with friends who value stories of justice, and subscribe to this channel for more dramatic, real-life inspired narratives. Together, let's stand against prejudice and champion those who fight for what's right, wherever and however that fight may unfold. Safe travels and stay vigilant.